The last phone call. The city was restless that night. The streets below Anna Wells' apartment hummed with the occasional hiss of tires against wet pavement. The glow of streetlights cast long shadows against the rain-speckled windows, a soft golden hue flickering against the walls of her small living room. The television, playing some old horror movie she barely paid attention to, flickered dimly in the background. The rhythmic patter of rain against the glass had begun to lull her into a daze, her fingers idly scrolling through her phone when it rang. The name on the screen sent a small wave of surprise through her, Kali. Her best friend rarely called this late. Something about it felt off, an inexplicable unease creeping up her spine. She swiped to answer, pressing the phone to her ear. The voice on the other end was hushed, breathy, carrying an unmistakable weight of terror. The sound of uneven breathing crackled through the line, punctuated by faint rustling, like fabric shifting against something rough. Then silence. Just before the connection cut, there was something else. A barely audible creak, as if someone or something was moving in the background. Anna sat frozen for a moment, the phone still pressed against her ear even as the call disconnected. A pit formed in her stomach, an instinctive dread unfurling through her limbs. She had known Kali for years, had heard every inflection of her voice, but never had she heard that kind of fear. Without a second thought, she grabbed her keys, slipped into her coat, and ran out into the cold rain. The drive to Kali's house felt longer than it should have. The city lights blurred in the downpour, smearing across the windshield as she sped through the empty streets. The sense of urgency pressed against her chest, the ghost of Kali's breathless voice echoing in her head. But as she turned onto Kali's street, her breath caught. The flashing of red and blue lights painted the raindrops in eerie colors. 2 police cruisers were parked outside the house, their doors ajar. The yellow barrier tape stretched across the front porch, fluttering slightly in the breeze. Officers moved about, their expressions grim under the glow of the porch light. The sight of them sent a shockwave of nausea through her. Something terrible had happened. Her feet carried her forward before she could fully process it. The ground was slick beneath her shoes as she rushed up the driveway, her pulse hammering in her ears. Her gaze darted toward the house, toward the familiar windows, but she found no signs of life within only darkness. An officer stepped into her path, his expression unreadable. There was a shift in his stance, a hesitation in the way he studied her. And then came the words that knocked the air from her lungs. Kali was dead. She had been for 3 days. The house smelled of stale air and something darker, something metallic that lingered beneath the surface. The furniture in the living room had been overturned, papers scattered across the floor, as if someone had searched frantically for something. The thick stain on the carpet near the couch drew Anna's gaze, its deep crimson hue nearly black in the dim light. A cold weight settled in her stomach. She had spoken to Kali less than an hour ago, had heard her voice, her fear, had felt the urgency in every breath. And yet here she was surrounded by the evidence of death that had taken place days before. The police led her down the hallway, their footsteps careful, deliberate. Kali's bedroom was eerily untouched. The posters still clung to the walls. The string lights along the headboard cast a soft, flickering glow. The candle on the nightstand had melted down to nothing, the wick cold and lifeless. The sheets were in disarray, and the closet door hung slightly ajar. And then, on the desk, inside a sealed evidence bag, lay Kali's phone. The sight of it sent another ripple of unease through her, the last connection between them. The device that had carried Kali's final words. But there was something else, something the detective explained in hushed tones, as if speaking it aloud might make it worse. The phone had been destroyed after Kali's death. The screen was shattered, the SIM card broken into useless fragments. There had been no outgoing calls after the time of her murder. And yet, Anna had received one. The night deepened. The house had become heavier, like it held its breath. Outside, rain continued to fall, whispering against the windows. In the patrol car, she sat rigid, staring at the grainy security footage displayed on a laptop screen. The timestamp read 11:50 p.m., just minutes before she had received the call. The porch was empty at first, the rain casting streaks against the lens. Then, a shadow moved at the edge of the frame, tall, still. It lingered for a long moment before stepping fully into view. Its face was obscured by the hood of a coat, but its posture was unnatural, slightly off, like it was waiting. Then, the knock. Anna's breath hitched as she watched the figure lift a hand and rap against the wooden door twice. A pause, then another set of knocks. And then, impossibly, the door opened. The figure stepped inside, disappearing into the house. The footage glitch static briefly filled the screen, warping the image, and then the feed cut out entirely. Anna's skin prickled. If the killer had entered at that moment, Callie must have already been dead. She had been dead for days. So why had the door opened? Hours later, Anna sat in her apartment, a blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Sleep refused to come. Every sound felt amplified, every shadow stretching too far into the dim light. Then her phone screen lit up. A notification. Her call log. The entry from earlier, the call from Callie, was gone. Not just deleted, erased, as if it had never happened. Her pulse quickened. She checked her voicemails, fingers trembling. There in the inbox was an unheard message from an unknown number. She pressed play. The distortion was immediate, static flooding through the speakers, rising and falling like breath. And beneath it, a voice. It was Callie's, strained, desperate. The words were barely recognizable through the interference, but Anna could make them out, each one dragging ice through her veins. Anna, please, don't let them in. Don't let them in. Don't. The message cut out. And then a sharp, deliberate knock at the door. Her blood turned to ice. She turned slowly toward the entrance of her apartment, barely able to breathe. Through the peephole, a shadow loomed, tall, motionless. The air seemed to tighten around her as she stood frozen in place. Then the voice came. Muffled, distorted, but unmistakably close. Anna, let me in. The light above flickered. The air felt too still. The knocking came again, harder. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe if you love this video. Thank you for watching.